Imagine trusting someone you love with everything you have, only to discover that they've been stealing from you all along. Lila, a devoted mother and widow, thought she had a close bond with her daughter-in-law Marissa. But when a shocking credit card bill arrives totaling $53,000 in luxury items and a lavish Paris getaway, Lila's world is turned upside down. The betrayal cuts deep, especially when Marissa smugly messages her, "Love the gifts, mother-in-law." But what if this theft is just the beginning? Lila realizes there's more at stake than money. Her entire family's trust is hanging by a thread. And the truth? It's even darker than she imagined. Lila Foster had always been the backbone of her family. At 60 years old, she had spent decades pouring all of her energy into her home, her husband, and most of all, her only son, Jake. She was the kind of mother who would put her family's needs before her own, even when it meant sacrificing her own happiness. For her, family was everything, an unspoken promise that would never be broken. But even as she held everything together, Lila couldn't help but feel that something was off. There was a subtle distance in her relationship with her daughter-in-law, Marissa. Lila had always tried her best to welcome Marissa into the family with open arms. But there was something cold about the way Marissa interacted with her. Lila noticed how her daughter-in-law's smiles never reached her eyes, and how she'd often brush off Lila's attempts at making small talk. It was as though Lila's efforts were never quite good enough, and Marissa wasn't particularly interested in making the effort to bridge that gap. Still, Lila pressed on. She believed that with time, things would improve. The family lived in a large house in a quiet, affluent neighborhood. The house, although beautiful, was a reminder to Lila of all the work and sacrifices she had made to ensure that Jake and Marissa could have the life she never did. It wasn't just the house, it was everything. The career she had given up when Jake was born, the dreams she put on hold, the late nights she worked overtime just to make ends meet. Lila did all this for her family, believing that one day they would appreciate it. Yet as the years went by, the appreciation she had longed for seemed to dwindle. Jake, her only son, was now in his mid-30s, and Lila couldn't shake the feeling that he had become too wrapped up in his own life to pay attention to the sacrifices his mother had made. He had moved out after marrying Marissa, and while they visited occasionally, their time together felt more like a formality than genuine connection. It hurt Lila deeply, but she always brushed it off. She told herself that this was what happened when children grew up and started their own families. They had to build their own futures, and Lila understood that, or at least she convinced herself that she did. Then came the day that everything changed. Lila had been going through some old papers in her bedroom when she noticed something odd, a credit card statement that wasn't hers. The name on the bill was hers, but the charges listed were completely unfamiliar. Curious, she began to scan the charges, her heart rate quickening with each line. There were several entries for high-end designer clothes, expensive dinners at upscale restaurants, and even a few charges from an exotic vacation. Lila's hands trembled as she read the total at the bottom, $53,000. Her mind raced as she tried to process what she was seeing. She felt her stomach drop. It wasn't the amount of money that stunned her. It was the realization of who had used the card. Marissa's name was the common thread throughout the statement. It was clear that Marissa had been using Lila's credit card without her permission, running up a bill that far exceeded what Lila had ever imagined. The shock of it was enough to make her feel dizzy. But as the initial shock wore off, a new, deeper feeling crept in: betrayal. Lila knew that her financial situation had always been a bit precarious. She had been diligent with her spending, often going without so her son and his wife could have everything they needed. She had never imagined that the one person she had trusted most, her own daughter-in-law, would take advantage of her kindness in such a blatant way. As the hours passed, Lila found herself frozen, staring at the credit card statement in disbelief. Her first instinct was to confront Marissa immediately. She could already imagine the argument that would ensue, the defensiveness, the excuses, the apologies. But Lila's heart told her to hold off. She didn't want to face Marissa yet. She didn't want to deal with the hurt and the lies. Instead, she sat in silence, her hands still trembling, as the weight of the betrayal sank deeper into her soul. What hurt the most wasn't just the money. It was the realization that Marissa had never once thought to ask for permission, let alone offer to pay it back. It was the coldness of the act, the way she had used Lila's trust and kindness as a mere stepping stone for her own desires. The act of betrayal cut deeper than any financial loss ever could. Lila thought of Jake. Her son had always been her pride and joy. She had given him everything she had, even when there was little left to give. She had believed that one day he would appreciate it, that he would see all the sacrifices she had made for him and his family. But now, Lila couldn't help but wonder if Jake even knew. Did he have any idea what Marissa was doing behind his back? And if he did, why hadn't he said anything? Was he complicit? The questions swirled in Lila's mind, and she found herself drowning in the uncertainty. She thought back to the times she had put her foot down for Jake, the times when she had stood firm in her decisions, even when it was hard. And now, here she was, completely blindsided by the very people she had sacrificed everything for. As the evening wore on, Lila sat in the quiet of her living room, feeling more alone than ever. Jake hadn't called to check in, and Marissa had avoided any real conversation with her in days. It was as though they were living in two separate worlds, and Lila was the one left on the outside. She took a deep breath and glanced at the family photos hanging on the wall. Photos of happier times, of moments when they had all seemed so close. But now, everything felt distant. The bond she had tried so hard to maintain had slipped through her fingers, and in its place was an overwhelming feeling of loss. For the first time in a long time, Lila felt that perhaps all the sacrifices she had made had been for nothing. Her heart ached with the realization that her family might never truly appreciate her. But the deeper wound, the one that cut the deepest, was the betrayal of someone she had welcomed into her heart. Lila sat motionless, the credit card statement still in her hands, her eyes scanning the pages over and over again. But the numbers didn't change. The amount was staggering, $53,000. An amount Lila couldn't even fathom spending in a lifetime, let alone on frivolous luxuries. Her thoughts spiraled, and she began to comb through the details more thoroughly. What she discovered next only deepened the wound. There were charges for expensive jewelry, pieces Lila had never seen before, despite the fact that she had always been the one who'd gone out of her way to pick out thoughtful gifts for Marissa. Then came the Paris vacation, a lavish, high-end trip, complete with first-class flights and luxury accommodations. That too was paid for with her card, with no discussion, no consent, and certainly no offer of repayment. But that wasn't the worst part. What truly crushed her was the realization that Marissa had managed to live this extravagant life on Lila's dime, without so much as a second thought about the consequences. Lila could barely wrap her head around it. Had Marissa ever truly seen her as family, or had she just been another means to an end, a source of endless resources? Lila's chest tightened as her mind reeled. She had always known that Marissa had an expensive taste, but she had never suspected it would go this far. How had she been so blind? How had she failed to see the signs? Her mind raced as she tried to understand how someone she had welcomed into her life so openly could betray her like this. And then, like a cruel punch to the gut, Lila's phone buzzed. It was a message from Marissa, a simple text that read, "Thanks for the amazing gift, mother-in-law. I'm so grateful." The words on the screen blurred as Lila's eyes filled with tears. Amazing gift? She felt sick. It was no longer just about money. It was about the complete disregard for Lila's feelings. Marissa wasn't even apologizing for what she had done. She wasn't acknowledging the betrayal at all. Instead, she was acting as though this was all a normal, acceptable transaction. Lila's heart pounded in her chest. How could she have been so stupid? She had raised Jake, had loved him with all her heart, and believed that he would choose a partner who respected family, who appreciated the sacrifices Lila had made. Yet here was Marissa treating her like an ATM, and Jake, her son, the one person who should have been her ally, hadn't even bothered to step in. Had he known? Was he aware of what Marissa was doing behind his back? But even as the anger boiled up inside her, Lila did something she didn't expect. She didn't respond. She didn't fire off an angry text or confront Marissa right then and there. Instead, she chose to stay silent, a choice that both relieved and terrified her. Lila had always been the one to confront problems head-on, but this time she wanted to think carefully about how to handle this. Her entire world had been turned upside down. Her son's wife had just crossed a line, and Lila didn't know what to do. If she went after Marissa now, she risked making everything worse, escalating the situation into an emotional confrontation that would get her nowhere. But if she stayed silent, she would risk allowing this betrayal to fester, allowing herself to remain vulnerable, stuck in a toxic relationship that she had never signed up for. Lila sank back into the couch, her hands trembling as she put the phone down. She didn't want to believe that the woman she had treated like family could be capable of such manipulation. But the evidence was irrefutable. Marissa had used her, and not only had she stolen money from Lila's credit card, but she had also stolen her trust. Lila closed her eyes, letting the silence of the room surround her, the weight of the betrayal suffocating her. She could feel the walls of the house pressing in on her, suffocating her. The once warm and inviting home now felt cold and unwelcoming. It was as if the love and care she had poured into this family for decades had been turned into nothing more than a transaction in which she had been the one taken advantage of. She thought about Jake. Was he oblivious to everything? Or worse, was he complicit? Lila couldn't help but wonder if he knew about Marissa's actions and just turned a blind eye. If he did, it was worse than the betrayal itself. Lila took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm that was swirling inside her. The hurt was deep, but it was also a wake-up call. This was a turning point. It was clear now that she couldn't continue living like this, accepting this toxic relationship out of a misplaced sense of loyalty. She had to make a decision, and it had to be one that put her own happiness first. After what felt like an eternity, Lila finally reached for her phone again. But this time, instead of texting Marissa back, she called her lawyer. The decision was made. She was done being taken for granted. It was time to take control of her life and her finances. But even as she set the phone down, her heart twisted in her chest. What would happen to her relationship with Jake? Could it ever be the same again? Or had that ship sailed, leaving her alone with the consequences of a lifetime of sacrifices? Lila had always been a fighter, but this time it felt different. She wasn't just fighting for her family anymore. She was fighting for herself, for the woman she had become after all these years of giving and giving without receiving. And for the first time in a long while, she knew that the fight was hers to win. Lila's heart raced as she pored over the credit card statements once again. The numbers and transactions blurred together, but this time she wasn't just scanning for the obvious. She was digging deeper, determined to find the truth. Each line item seemed more outrageous than the last. Luxury shopping sprees, stays at five-star hotels, lavish dinners, most of which took place months before, hidden in plain sight. Every discovery cut deeper, each one a new betrayal. She wasn't imagining things. Marissa had been using her credit card with reckless abandon, and now it was clear. This wasn't just a few careless purchases. It was a pattern of deceit. The realization felt like a weight pressing against her chest. How could Marissa have been so bold, and why didn't Jake notice the signs? Was this all part of a bigger plan, one that Lila had been blind to all along? It seemed like everything she had believed about her family, about love, trust, and loyalty, was now in question. Her fingers tightened around the phone as she dialed the number of her bank, requesting a full history of the charges, hoping that somewhere there would be an explanation, some sort of justification for what she had discovered. $53,000. The total was a staggering sum, but it wasn't just the amount that devastated her. It was the sense of betrayal from the person she had once trusted most. She had spent her entire life giving, sacrificing, and loving, only to be repaid with deceit. After a long conversation with a bank representative, Lila hung up, feeling both relieved and sickened by the confirmation of what she had suspected. The bank assured her that they would be investigating the charges, but that wasn't what concerned Lila the most. What hurt the most was the fact that Marissa hadn't even tried to explain herself. She had been too comfortable in her actions, too confident that Lila would never question her. Then, just as Lila was trying to process everything, her phone buzzed. She almost didn't want to answer it, but something compelled her to look at the screen. It was a call from Jake. She hadn't spoken to him in a few days, not since the confrontation with Marissa. Maybe, just maybe, he could offer some comfort. Maybe he'd see what was going on. "Hey, Mom," Jake's voice came through the speaker, cheerful but distant. "How's everything? Just calling to check in." Lila's heart sank. It was good to hear from him, but it felt as though Jake was talking to her through a haze, as if he were a million miles away. The conversations they used to have, about everything and nothing, felt so distant now. "Everything's fine, Jake," Lila replied, trying to keep the tension out of her voice. "But there's something we need to talk about." She hesitated. Then, as the words came tumbling out, she explained the charges she had discovered on her credit card. She told him about the extravagant purchases, the trips to Paris, the expensive jewelry, and the meals at exclusive restaurants. Jake was silent for a moment, and Lila felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Then he spoke, his tone laced with uncertainty. "Mom, I'm sure Marissa had a good reason for all of this. You know how she is. She probably thought it was fine. She said she had permission to use your card for some of this stuff. It's all been sorted out, right?" Lila felt a wave of frustration rise up inside her. She had explained everything, every last detail, but Jake wasn't getting it. He was brushing her concerns aside, believing his wife's vague explanations without question. His response was so dismissive, so quick to defend Marissa, that Lila couldn't help but feel as if he were choosing her over his own mother. "But Jake," Lila protested, her voice cracking, "this is my credit card. How could you just let her use it without asking me? And why are you acting like this isn't a big deal? Do you see what she's done?" "Mom, I'm just saying, maybe you're overreacting a little. Marissa probably thought she had everything in order." Jake's voice had a tone of finality, as if the conversation had already been decided. Lila's heart sank even further. She could hear the distance in his voice, the lack of empathy for her. It was as though all the years of love and sacrifice, all the moments she had been there for him, counted for nothing. In that moment, Lila realized something painful. Jake didn't see her. He didn't understand the depth of her hurt, the weight of the betrayal. "Jake," she said quietly, "this isn't just about money. It's about trust. It's about respect." "I get it, Mom, but trust me, everything will be fine. Marissa just made a mistake." Jake's voice softened a little, but Lila could tell he was trying to end the conversation. Lila closed her eyes, fighting back the tears. She wanted to believe him. She really did. But there was something in Jake's voice, something so defensive, that told her he wasn't taking her seriously. He wasn't seeing the full picture. She had hoped, deep down, that he would stand by her, that he would be the one to stand up for her against the woman who had deceived them both. But instead, he was siding with Marissa, giving her the benefit of the doubt and pushing his mother's feelings aside. The more Lila thought about it, the more she felt the loneliness pressing in. She had given her all for this family, her love, her time, her money, but it seemed like no one understood, no one cared. "I'll talk to you later, Mom," Jake said, his voice still gentle but distant. "I have to go now. Take care." The line went dead, and Lila sat there in stunned silence. Her son, the one person she had always believed would be her ally, had just dismissed her pain. In that moment, Lila realized that she wasn't just battling Marissa. She was also battling her own son. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Jake wasn't just defending his wife. He was defending the life they had built together, the comfort they had, even if it meant ignoring the damage Marissa had done to his own mother. Lila knew that she had to fight. But now, she wasn't sure who her real enemies were. Lila sat in her living room, the weight of Jake's dismissive response pressing down on her like a heavy blanket. She had always believed that her son would be the one to stand by her, the one person who would see through the deception and defend her. But now, she realized that wasn't going to happen. Jake had chosen to ignore the truth to protect his wife, Marissa, over his own mother. The feeling of betrayal hit her harder than ever before. But this time, it wasn't just about the betrayal of her daughter-in-law. It was the sense of being ignored, of being pushed aside by the one person who should have understood her pain. The conversation with Jake left Lila feeling more isolated than ever. She had no one to turn to, no one who would support her in this. But Lila was no stranger to adversity. She had spent her life working tirelessly, doing whatever it took to keep her family together. If she had to go through this battle alone, so be it. But she wasn't going to let this slide. Not this time. Lila knew that if she wanted to make things right, she had to confront Marissa directly. It wasn't going to be easy. She had never been one to back down, but the thought of confronting her daughter-in-law about something as serious as financial abuse made her stomach churn. Still, she had no choice. She couldn't sit in silence any longer. The time for action was now. For the next few days, Lila kept a watchful eye on the mail, waiting for the next credit card statement to arrive. She couldn't afford to miss a single detail. The money that Marissa had spent wasn't just excessive. It was a violation of trust, a betrayal of the relationship they had worked so hard to build. Lila wasn't about to let her daughter-in-law get away with it, not without confronting her. When the new statement finally arrived, Lila wasted no time. She spread out the receipts and bank statements on her kitchen table, her eyes scanning every single line. As she went through each transaction, her anger grew. Expensive clothes, lavish vacations, and extravagant dinners. It was all there, staring back at her. But as she sifted through the papers, something caught her eye. A transaction listed under an innocuous name, something she hadn't seen before. Brighter Horizons Looted. She didn't recognize the name, and the amount was hefty, close to $10,000. Confused, Lila decided to dig deeper. She pulled up the name on her phone and did a quick search. To her shock, there was nothing. No company website, no listing in any local business registry, just a dead end. Lila felt her heart race. This wasn't just some casual shopping spree or impulse buy. This was something much more sinister. Determined to find out more, Lila contacted the credit card company and asked for further details about the transaction. The representative was polite but unhelpful, claiming that the transaction seemed legitimate, but couldn't provide any further information without a full investigation. The lack of transparency was frustrating, but Lila wasn't going to give up. She knew that something was off about all of this, and she was going to get to the bottom of it. A few days later, Lila received a package in the mail, something that caught her by surprise. It was an envelope addressed to her, but it was postmarked from an offshore location. When she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. Inside were documents that looked like false invoices for various services and transactions. They were written in a way that appeared legitimate, but there were discrepancies, dates that didn't match, strange amounts, and signatures that were either too generic or outright forged. Lila could hardly believe what she was seeing. As she carefully examined each document, the truth became clearer. Marissa wasn't just using Lila's credit card. She was laundering money through a series of fake transactions. The receipts were cleverly fabricated to make the purchases seem legitimate. But the true nature of these transactions was anything but. Lila's hands trembled as she realized the extent of the betrayal. This wasn't just about being used, it was about being exploited, her trust manipulated to cover up something far worse. Lila sat back in her chair, the documents spread out in front of her like a roadmap to deception. She felt a mix of disbelief and outrage. The anger she had initially felt towards Marissa now paled in comparison to the fury burning inside her. She had always known that Marissa had a certain air of entitlement, but this was a whole new level of manipulation. This wasn't just about reckless spending, it was about criminal activity, about using her to launder money. Her heart was heavy as she processed what she had just uncovered. It was no longer just a matter of confronting Marissa over a few expensive purchases. Now, it was about facing the truth about who Marissa really was and what she had done. Lila felt the weight of the decision ahead of her. What should she do with this information? How could she confront Marissa with evidence of such a serious crime? The thought of confronting her directly made Lila feel both powerful and vulnerable at the same time. She knew that Marissa wouldn't take this accusation lightly, and the last thing Lila wanted was to escalate the situation into a full-blown confrontation. But she also knew that she couldn't allow this to continue. If Marissa thought she could get away with this, she was gravely mistaken. Lila spent the rest of the evening making phone calls to her lawyer, asking for guidance on what to do next. She had to be careful. This was a serious matter, and the last thing she wanted was to make the wrong move. She needed a plan, a way to protect herself and her assets, and to ensure that Marissa would be held accountable for what she had done. As Lila ended the call with her lawyer, she felt a renewed sense of determination. She was done being the victim. It was time to take control of this situation, to stand up for herself and expose the truth. Marissa had crossed a line, and now Lila was going to make sure that the consequences were severe. Lila felt like she was in a race against time. Every moment that passed seemed to bring her closer to uncovering the truth, but also further into a tangled web of deceit she hadn't anticipated. She had thought that the problem lay solely with Marissa and her reckless spending, but the more she investigated, the more Lila realized this wasn't just an isolated issue. Something much bigger was at play. She spent the next few days carefully going through every bit of information she could gather. Every credit card statement, every receipt, nothing was left unchecked. Lila's mind raced as she dug deeper, her suspicions growing stronger with every discovery. There were too many connections that didn't add up, and the more she uncovered, the more it became clear that Marissa wasn't acting alone. Lila began to suspect that there might be others involved, others who had been helping Marissa cover her tracks. It all started when Lila found a series of transactions at several unfamiliar locations. They were all high-end stores, but places Lila had never heard of. Small, exclusive boutiques tucked away in corners of the city. Some of the businesses were off the beaten path, hidden in out-of-sight areas. Why would Marissa, who had always prided herself on living within her means, frequent such places? And more importantly, why did these locations never show up on any of the normal credit card statements? Lila began to suspect that Marissa was laundering money, funneling funds through hidden channels, using these obscure businesses as cover for her activities. With each new piece of information, Lila's suspicion grew. The transactions didn't stop at shopping sprees. There were large sums of money being transferred to accounts that Lila couldn't track. Accounts with names she didn't recognize. Marissa was clearly careful, meticulous in her efforts to hide the extent of her spending. But Lila was determined to get to the bottom of it, even if it meant following leads into places that made her uneasy. One evening, after a long day of investigating, Lila came across something that sent a chill down her spine, a list of dates and times. At first glance, it seemed like a collection of appointments, meetings scheduled with various people at nondescript locations. But the more Lila looked at it, the more she realized something was amiss. The list wasn't about business meetings or social events. It was about meetings with people who had a hand in managing the assets Marissa had been hiding. This was a network, a well-organized structure of individuals who were helping her launder money, buying expensive items on her behalf, and even helping her siphon funds from Lila's accounts. Her pulse quickened as she clicked through more documents. Lila's hands were shaking, but she forced herself to read on. She had to know everything. As she dug deeper, she stumbled upon an unexpected discovery, a hidden folder on Marissa's laptop labeled Personal Files. Her curiosity was now a driving force. What could be hidden in here? The folder contained a series of financial documents, detailed plans, and projections that sent Lila's world spinning. It was a long-term plan, one that Marissa had apparently been building for months, maybe even years. Lila could hardly believe what she was reading. There were spreadsheets outlining future financial goals, not just related to Marissa's purchases, but also to influencing Jake's business decisions. Lila's eyes widened as she pieced together the plan. Marissa wasn't just using Lila's money for her own gain. She was positioning herself to take control of Jake's family business, making sure that she would always be the one holding the purse strings. Lila's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't just about money anymore. It wasn't just about a few $1,000s spent on clothes and vacations. This was about power. About Marissa manipulating Jake and using her connection to him to gain control over every aspect of their lives. Lila was just a pawn in her plan, a means to an end. The more Lila read, the clearer it became. Marissa had been plotting for a long time. She wasn't just interested in stealing from Lila, she was preparing to take over Jake's life, his business, and everything that Lila had worked so hard to build. Her motives were far more sinister than Lila had ever imagined. The documents laid out detailed plans to move assets, manipulate investments, and strengthen Marissa's grip on the family's future. Lila realized that everything she had assumed about her family's stability, about the love and trust that had once defined them, had been nothing more than a facade. Lila's head was spinning. This was more than just a betrayal. It was a calculated conspiracy, one that involved more people than just Marissa. Lila's family, her home, and everything she had worked for were under attack. She couldn't just sit back anymore and let this happen. She had to take action. The realization of what Marissa had done, what she was planning, left Lila feeling both devastated and determined. There was no turning back now. The next steps weren't going to be easy, but Lila knew she had to face this head on. The documents in front of her were the proof she needed. It wasn't just about confronting Marissa. It was about taking back control over her life, her family, and her legacy. But first, she needed more information. There were still gaps in the story, still pieces of the puzzle that weren't quite clear. Lila knew she couldn't do this alone. She would need help. But who could she trust? And how far was Marissa willing to go to get what she wanted? Lila sat at her desk, eyes scanning the documents that now filled every available surface in her home office. The weight of what she had uncovered over the past few days had finally begun to sink in. She had always known that there was something off about Marissa, something lurking beneath the surface. But the depth of the conspiracy, the extent to which Marissa had planned her manipulation, had taken Lila completely by surprise. Lila's hands shook as she flipped through the stack of papers. She had already seen evidence of Marissa's reckless spending, but this was different. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was something far more calculated, far more dangerous. Among the cluttered files and legal documents, one particular folder stood out, a folder labeled Family Trust. She hesitated for a moment, her mind racing with the implications. Could this be the breakthrough she was looking for? She opened the folder, her eyes falling on the first document, a legal contract that appeared to be a trust agreement for the family assets. Lila's breath caught in her throat as she skimmed through the contents. This wasn't just any ordinary trust agreement. It was a power of attorney document, granting Marissa exclusive control over the family finances in the event of Lila's incapacitation or death. But what struck Lila the most was that it had been signed and notarized, and it was in her own name, yet she had never agreed to such a document. Lila's mind spun as she reread the terms. The document outlined Marissa's ability to access and control all of Lila's financial accounts, as well as the rights to sell or transfer ownership of the family home without any input from Lila or Jake. The thought of Marissa having this much control sent a chill through her body. How had this happened? How had Marissa managed to convince someone to create this document? Or worse, forged Lila's signature? Lila's hand flew to her phone as she dialed her lawyer, her heart racing. She needed answers, and she needed them now. As the phone rang, she glanced once more at the document, her stomach churning with anger and disbelief. She had spent decades building a life with her son, her husband, and her daughter-in-law, only to realize that everything she had worked for was in jeopardy, all because of one person's greed and manipulation. "Hello?" The voice on the other end of the line was calm, but Lila could sense the urgency in her own voice as she spoke. "I need you to look at something," Lila said, her voice tight with emotion. "I found a document, an official power of attorney. Marissa has signed it, giving her complete control over my finances. I never agreed to this, and I think it's forged." There was a long pause, and then her lawyer spoke. "Lila, I need you to send that document to me immediately. We need to look into this as soon as possible. If it's a forgery, we can take legal action, but this could be much more serious if it was done under the guise of your approval." Lila's hands trembled as she quickly scanned the rest of the folder. There were additional documents, wills, property transfers, and more power of attorney forms, all bearing the same forged signature. Lila's heart sank. This wasn't just about one document. This was part of an elaborate scheme, one that Marissa had been working on for months, maybe even years. The deeper Lila dug, the clearer it became. Marissa's plan wasn't just about stealing money. It was about taking control of the entire family. Lila had always thought that Marissa was just a selfish woman, someone who spent money without thinking about the consequences, but this was something entirely different. Marissa wasn't just after her money. She was after everything. As Lila stared at the paperwork in front of her, it hit her with full force. Marissa had been plotting her family's future without anyone knowing. She had been positioning herself to take over every aspect of their lives, using the guise of love and loyalty to manipulate everyone around her. She wasn't just a greedy wife. She was a calculating predator, preying on the trust and generosity of the family she had infiltrated. The shock of it left Lila feeling nauseous. She had spent years trusting Marissa, trying to be a good mother-in-law, welcoming her into her family with open arms. And now, Lila realized that Marissa had been biding her time, waiting for the right moment to strike. Lila's hands clenched into fists as she fought to regain her composure. She was no stranger to fighting for what was right. But this was something she had never prepared for. She had always believed that family meant something more than money or power. But now, it was clear. Marissa was willing to destroy everything Lila had worked for in her relentless pursuit of control. Lila took a deep breath and closed the folder, her mind already working on a plan. She couldn't allow Marissa to get away with this. She couldn't just sit back and let her take everything. But this was going to require more than just confronting her directly. She had to be strategic. Lila knew that she needed to gather more evidence, build a solid case, and then, only then, confront Marissa. But as Lila thought about it, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about her money or assets. This was about something much deeper, her family. And she wasn't going to let anyone, especially Marissa, tear it apart. With a newfound sense of determination, Lila set to work. She would gather the evidence, expose the truth, and make sure that Marissa paid the price for what she had done. Lila knew it wasn't going to be easy, but she was ready to fight. She was done being the victim. It was time for Marissa to face the consequences of her actions. The tension in the room was palpable as Lila stood across from Marissa, the woman who had betrayed her trust in the most profound way possible. The clock on the wall ticked ominously, but Lila didn't care. Her heart pounded in her chest, the emotion she had bottled up for days threatening to break free. Today, she was no longer the passive, long-suffering mother-in-law. Today, she was taking control. "Marissa," Lila began, her voice steady but laced with fury. "We need to talk. I've seen the credit card statements. I've seen everything." Marissa's face froze for a moment, but she quickly masked it with a smile that seemed too forced to be genuine. "Lila, I don't know what you're talking about. You must be mistaken. There's no issue here." Lila's eyes narrowed. "Don't lie to me. $53,000 in charges, Marissa. Jewelry, vacations, lavish dinners, all from my credit card. How do you explain that?" Marissa's smile faltered, just for a second, but she quickly recovered, leaning back in her chair with an air of defiance. "I don't need to explain anything. It's my right. Jake and I—" "Don't you dare bring Jake into this!" Lila's voice cut through the room, sharp and clear. "You've been using him just as much as you've been using me. This isn't just about money anymore. It's about deceit. It's about manipulation. And I'm done being your pawn." For the first time in the conversation, Lila saw a flicker of unease in Marissa's eyes. The cool composure she had tried to maintain was starting to slip. Lila could sense the shift, the cracks forming in Marissa's carefully crafted facade. But she wasn't done yet. Lila reached into her bag and pulled out the documents she had gathered. The power of attorney, the forged signatures, the detailed plans Marissa had put together to take over her family's finances. It was all there, staring Marissa in the face. "I've done my homework, Marissa," Lila said coldly, spreading the documents across the table. "These are forgeries. You're not just a thief. You're a fraud. You've been planning this for months, manipulating Jake and me to get what you want." Marissa's face turned pale as she glanced at the papers in front of her. The confident expression she had worn moments before began to crack, her eyes darting back and forth as she scanned the incriminating evidence. "I don't know where you got these, but they're not true," Marissa stammered, her voice losing some of its earlier strength. "Jake and I have done nothing wrong. This is just a misunderstanding." Lila didn't respond right away. She didn't need to. The proof was undeniable, and she could see Marissa struggling to hold her ground. But Lila wasn't finished. "You can deny it all you want, but the truth is right in front of you." Lila leaned forward, her voice low and dangerous. "You've been using my credit card without permission. You've been plotting behind my back, and you think I wouldn't find out? You underestimated me." For a moment, there was silence in the room. A tense, heavy silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Lila watched as Marissa fidgeted, clearly on edge, but just as she thought Marissa might crack, the door swung open. It was Jake. "Mom, what's going on?" Jake's voice was calm, but there was a hint of concern in his eyes. "Why are you yelling at Marissa?" Lila's heart sank as she turned to look at her son. Even now, after everything that had been revealed, he was still defending his wife. It was as though the years of love and sacrifice she had poured into raising him meant nothing. "Jake," Lila said, trying to keep her voice steady, "you need to see what's going on here. Marissa has been using my credit card for months. She's been stealing from me, plotting to take control of the family's finances." Jake cut her off before she could finish. "Mom, stop. You're blowing this out of proportion. Marissa's just doing what she thinks is right. It's her right to spend money. It's her right to make decisions about her life." Lila's breath caught in her throat. Was he seriously saying this? This wasn't just about money. This was about trust, betrayal, and the very foundation of the family she had worked so hard to build. She couldn't believe that Jake, her own flesh and blood, was still standing by Marissa's side, brushing aside everything she had revealed. "I didn't raise you to be like this," Lila muttered, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't raise you to let someone lie to you, manipulate you, and take everything we've built together. I thought you would stand by me. I thought you would understand. But instead, you're defending the woman who's been stealing from us both." Jake's expression faltered for just a moment, but then he straightened up, his jaw tightening. "I don't want to hear this. Marissa is my wife, and I'm not going to sit here and let you attack her like this." Lila stood up, her hands trembling as she pointed toward the door. "Fine. If you want to live in denial, Jake, that's your choice. But don't come crying to me when everything falls apart. This," she gestured to the papers on the table, "this is the truth. And you're too blind to see it." Jake didn't respond. He just stood there, his arms crossed, his face set in a defensive stance. Lila felt the weight of his indifference pressing down on her, making her feel more alone than ever before. Marissa sat back in her chair, trying to regain her composure, but it was clear that the confrontation had shaken her. The smugness was gone, replaced by a thin veil of fear that Lila hadn't seen before. It was almost satisfying to know that Marissa could no longer hide behind her manipulations. But the cost of this victory was much higher than Lila had anticipated. She had exposed the truth, but in doing so, she had also lost her son. And that realization, more than anything else, left a deep ache in her heart. The silence in the room was deafening. Lila stood across from Jake and Marissa, the weight of everything that had been said still hanging in the air. For a long moment, Jake stood frozen, his eyes locked on the pile of documents that Lila had laid out on the table. He'd been so certain that his wife, Marissa, was innocent, that she had done nothing wrong. But now, with the evidence staring him in the face, he was forced to confront a reality he never wanted to accept. "Jake," Lila's voice broke the silence, her tone much softer now. "Look at these documents. These aren't just random charges. These are forged signatures. Marissa has been using my credit card for months. This is deliberate. You have to see it, Jake. She's been planning this and you've been blind to it." Jake swallowed hard, his face pale as he skimmed the documents in front of him. The luxury shopping, the trips, the money laundering scheme. It was all there, laid bare for him to see. For a moment, he looked like he might speak, but the words seemed to stick in his throat. I don't know what to say, Mom," Jake finally muttered, his voice cracking with emotion. "I never thought it would be like this, but..." He trailed off, his eyes shifting nervously between Lila and Marissa. Marissa sat on the edge of her chair, her face flushed, her hands clasped tightly together as she stared at Jake. "Jake, you have to believe me," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "This is just a misunderstanding. You know I would never do anything to hurt you, to hurt our family." But Lila wasn't buying it. She was done with the excuses, done with the lies. "Marissa, this is beyond a misunderstanding. These are criminal actions. You've been using me to get everything you want, and you've been hiding it from Jake, too." Jake, still in shock, turned to Marissa, his eyes filled with disbelief. "Why didn't you tell me about this? Why didn't you come to me first?" His voice was softer now, but the hurt in it was clear. He felt betrayed, but not just by Marissa. He had been deceived by the one person he trusted the most. Marissa opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Her eyes darted around the room as though searching for the right words, but she couldn't seem to find them. Lila's voice was calm but firm as she continued, "You thought you could hide all of this forever, didn't you? You thought you could get away with it. But I know the truth now, and so does Jake." Just as it seemed like the tension might snap, Lila noticed something in the corner of her eye, a piece of paper sticking out from under a pile of receipts. It was a document she hadn't seen before. She reached for it, unfolded it, and then her eyes widened. "Jake, look at this," she said, her voice cold with shock. "This isn't just about Marissa. You've been dragged into this too." Jake frowned, taking the paper from her hand. As he read it, his face drained of color. The document was a power of attorney form, signed and notarized, but it had Jake's signature on it. Lila watched as the shock and confusion spread across her son's face. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice low and disbelieving. "How did this happen?" The realization hit him hard, like a punch to the gut. He had no memory of signing any such document. And worse, he didn't even know what he had agreed to. The document gave Marissa full control over their financial affairs, including the right to make major decisions about the family business and assets. "I didn't sign this," Jake said, shaking his head in disbelief. "How could I have? I don't remember doing this." Lila felt her heart twist as she looked at her son. He looked lost, like a part of him had been shattered. She had warned him, had tried to show him the truth, but he hadn't been ready to see it. Now the evidence was right in front of him, and the damage was done. "This is your signature, Jake," Lila said gently. "It's here, in black and white. And you didn't even know about it, did you?" Jake's hands were shaking as he held the paper, his eyes wide with disbelief. His thoughts were racing, but it was clear that he was struggling to piece everything together. "How could I have signed this without knowing?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lila sighed heavily, her heart aching for the son she had once known so well. "Marissa has been manipulating everything behind your back. She's been using you, Jake, and she's been using me. But she couldn't do it alone." Marissa, who had been silent up until this point, finally spoke, her voice dripping with frustration. "This isn't fair. I've done nothing wrong. I didn't force Jake to sign anything. He agreed to it. He knows this is for the best." Lila shook her head, the pain of Marissa's denial settling in her chest. "No, Marissa. You're the one who's been using Jake, and now you've dragged him into something he didn't even know about." The tension in the room reached its peak as Jake looked at his wife and then back at his mother. He was torn, caught between the two women who had shaped his life. His mother, the one who had always been there for him, and Marissa, the woman he had promised to protect. He felt as though the ground had been pulled out from under him, leaving him in a void of uncertainty. "I didn't know," Jake finally admitted, his voice broken. "I didn't know any of this was happening. How could I have been so blind?" Lila's heart broke for him. She had never wanted to hurt her son, but the truth had to come out. He couldn't live in the dark anymore. Marissa had manipulated him, and it was time to face the consequences. "I'm sorry, Mom," Jake whispered, his eyes filled with regret. "I didn't know what she was doing. I should have seen it." Lila placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice soft but firm. "Jake, I love you, but you have to wake up. Marissa has been using both of us, and now we have to deal with it. It's time to make things right." As the words hung in the air, Lila knew this confrontation had only just begun. But for the first time, she felt like she wasn't alone in this battle. Jake had finally started to see the truth, and now it was up to them both to face what came next. Lila sat in her office, surrounded by stacks of documents, her mind focused on the task at hand. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about justice. She had been betrayed, manipulated, and used by the very people she had loved and trusted. Now it was time to take a stand, to make sure that Marissa would answer for her actions. Lila was done being a victim. She was going to make sure that Marissa paid for what she had done. The decision to take legal action hadn't come easily. Lila had spent days contemplating her next steps, trying to figure out how to confront Marissa in a way that would force her to acknowledge the damage she had caused. But as the days passed, the choice became clearer. Marissa had crossed a line that Lila could not allow to go unchallenged. Lila picked up her phone and called the lawyer she had contacted earlier. She had spent hours gathering evidence, compiling the credit card statements, the forged signatures, the power of attorney documents, and the network of businesses Marissa had used to conceal her spending. She had everything she needed. "Hello, Ms. Foster," the lawyer answered, her voice professional but warm. "Have you had a chance to go over everything?" "Yes," Lila said firmly, her voice unwavering. "I'm ready. I want to sue her. I have all the evidence. She's been using me, manipulating me, and I'm done. I want her to be held accountable." The lawyer was silent for a moment, as if processing the gravity of the situation. "Are you sure about this, Lila? Legal battles can be long and difficult, but if you're confident in your decision, we can move forward." "I'm sure," Lila replied. "I've spent too many years sacrificing everything for my family, and I'm not going to let one person tear it all down. Marissa needs to pay for what she's done." And with that, the decision was made. Lila knew this would be a long and challenging fight, but she wasn't afraid. She had spent a lifetime making sacrifices for the people she loved, but now it was time for her to fight for herself. She wasn't going to let Marissa get away with this. For the next few days, Lila and her lawyer worked tirelessly, compiling every piece of evidence they could find. They contacted the bank, the businesses involved, and even hired a private investigator to track down any additional information that could strengthen their case. Lila's determination was unmatched. The more she uncovered, the more infuriated she became. Marissa's actions were not just selfish. They were criminal, and Lila would make sure that justice was served. Meanwhile, Marissa had no idea what was coming. She still believed that she could talk her way out of this, that she could manipulate her way back into Jake's good graces and keep Lila in the dark. But the walls were closing in on her. One afternoon, as Lila was going over the final pieces of evidence with her lawyer, she received a call from an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat. It was Marissa. "Hello?" Lila answered, her voice steady but with a hint of tension. "Lila?" Marissa's voice came through the phone, tinged with desperation. "We need to talk. I know you're upset, but please, let's work this out. I can explain everything." Lila narrowed her eyes. She had been waiting for this moment, knowing that Marissa would eventually come crawling back, trying to salvage whatever she could. But Lila was done being manipulated. "I don't want to hear your excuses, Marissa," Lila said firmly, her voice cutting through the air. "You've crossed a line, and now it's time to face the consequences." Marissa's voice trembled. "Please, Lila, I'm sorry. I never meant for things to get so out of hand. I've been under so much pressure, and I didn't know how to handle it. Let's fix this. I'll pay back the money. We can pretend this never happened." Lila's eyes burned with anger as she listened to Marissa's words. The woman had no shame. She had betrayed Lila, stolen from her, manipulated her son, and now she was asking for forgiveness as if nothing had happened. "No, Marissa," Lila said, her voice low and resolute. "I'm not going to let you buy your way out of this. You think paying me back will make everything okay? You've damaged this family beyond repair. I'm not interested in your empty promises." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Lila could hear Marissa's labored breathing, the panic creeping into her voice. "Please, Lila, don't take this to court," Marissa begged. "We can settle this quietly. Just give me a chance." Lila shook her head, her jaw clenched in determination. "It's too late for that. You've made your choices, Marissa, and now you'll have to face the consequences. I'm filing a lawsuit. I'm taking you to court, and I won't stop until you're held accountable for what you've done." Marissa's tone shifted from pleading to defensive. "You'll regret this, Lila. You don't know what you're getting into. You have no idea how much I can destroy." Lila's heart raced, but this time it wasn't out of fear. It was from the sheer force of her own resolve. "I don't care what threats you try to make. I've had enough. It's over, Marissa. I'm done." With that, Lila ended the call, her hands trembling slightly, but her resolve stronger than ever. She had taken the first step in a battle that would change everything. The lawsuit was in motion. She wasn't going to let Marissa get away with this. Not now, not ever. As Lila hung up the phone, she took a deep breath. She could feel the weight of the coming battle, but she was ready. This wasn't just about money. It was about justice. It was about ensuring that Marissa would never be able to manipulate her or her family again. Lila had done the hard work. She had the evidence, the support, and the determination to see this through. And no matter how hard Marissa tried to fight back, Lila would make sure that justice was served. The air between Lila and Jake had never been more charged. For weeks, Lila had been waiting for Jake to truly see the truth, to acknowledge the betrayal that had been hidden right in front of him. But now, as the weight of everything finally sank in, Lila could feel a change in her son. His initial disbelief had transformed into something deeper: guilt, remorse, and the stark realization of just how blind he had been. Jake had spent days grappling with the evidence Lila had presented. The documents, the credit card statements, the forged signatures, everything pointed to one undeniable truth. Marissa had orchestrated a web of lies, and Jake had been an unwitting accomplice in her deceit. The knowledge hit him hard, and the realization that he had defended her at the expense of his own mother was a burden that weighed on him. One evening, as Lila was going through the paperwork related to the case, she received a call from Jake. Her heart skipped a beat as she picked up the phone. She had been waiting for this moment, the moment when Jake would finally take her side. "Mom?" Jake's voice was thick with emotion. "I'm sorry, I should have listened to you. I don't know how I didn't see it before, but you were right all along. I feel like I failed you." Lila felt a rush of relief. Her son's words, though filled with regret, were exactly what she needed to hear. She had never doubted that Jake had a good heart, but now she saw a new level of maturity in him, a desire to make things right. "I understand, Jake," Lila said gently. "I know this has been hard on you, but I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing it because you deserve the truth. We both do." "I want to help you, Mom. I've been so blind. I can't believe I didn't see what Marissa was doing. She's been manipulating both of us." Lila felt a mixture of pain and gratitude. She had always hoped that Jake would understand, that he would eventually see the manipulation for what it was, and now he was finally standing with her, ready to help her take action. "I'll make it right," Jake promised. "I'll do whatever it takes. You don't have to fight this alone." For the first time in weeks, Lila felt like the weight on her shoulders had lessened. She had her son back, not as the man who had been deceived, but as the man who was now ready to fight for what was right. Together, they would bring justice. The day of the trial finally arrived, and Lila felt a sense of determination like never before. It wasn't just about winning the case, it was about taking back control of her life, about standing up for herself after everything she had endured. As she sat in the courtroom, her heart pounded with anticipation. This was the moment when everything would change. Marissa, once so confident and sure of herself, now looked anxious, her eyes darting around the room as she sat in the defendant's chair. Her lawyer had tried to downplay the severity of the situation, offering flimsy excuses and claiming that the financial transactions were misunderstandings. But Lila had seen through the lies. The evidence was irrefutable, and there was nowhere for Marissa to hide. Jake sat beside Lila, his face a mixture of regret and resolve. He had vowed to support her, and today he stood by her side in the courtroom, ready to testify against the woman who had once been his wife. As the trial progressed, Lila could see the unease growing in Marissa's demeanor. She had thought she could get away with everything, but now the truth was being revealed, piece by piece. The moment of the verdict came, and Lila could hardly breathe. She had waited for this moment for so long, but now that it was here, the reality of what it meant settled over her. The judge spoke with authority, the words ringing out in the tense silence. The defendant, Marissa Foster, is hereby found guilty of fraud, financial theft, and conspiracy to manipulate assets. The court orders the defendant to repay all funds taken from the plaintiff, amounting to $53,000, plus interest. Lila felt a wave of relief wash over her. It was over. Marissa had been held accountable for her actions, and Lila had won. But more than that, justice had been served. Marissa could no longer hide behind her lies and manipulation. She would have to face the consequences of her actions. Marissa's face twisted with disbelief and anger as the verdict was read. Her lawyer tried to argue, but it was too late. Lila had won and Marissa had lost. Lila's heart was heavy as she looked over at Jake. He was still processing everything, still dealing with the aftermath of the betrayal. But now, they could begin to rebuild. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but at least they would face it together. After the trial, Lila and Jake walked out of the courtroom side by side. The weight of the past few weeks was beginning to lift, and Lila could feel a sense of peace settling in. She had fought for what was right, and now she was ready to move forward with her life. As the days passed, the reality of the situation began to set in for Marissa. She had been ordered to repay the money, but that was just the beginning. She would face legal consequences for her actions, and her reputation would be forever tainted. The woman who had once tried to manipulate and control everything had now lost everything. Lila knew that Marissa would have to live with the consequences of her choices. But for Lila, the true victory wasn't in the money or the legal victory. It was in reclaiming her life, her trust, and her family. She had stood up for herself and made sure that the truth came to light. And as for Jake, he had learned a valuable lesson. Family wasn't just about standing by someone blindly. It was about trust, honesty, and accountability. Lila had always been there for him, and now, for the first time, he understood what it meant to truly support his mother. They had both been through a lot, but now they could start anew, together. The days following the trial were filled with a new kind of clarity for Lila. She had lived for so long under the weight of her family's expectations, the constant pressure to be the perfect mother, the perfect wife, and the perfect mother-in-law. But now, for the first time in years, she felt like she could finally breathe. Lila had always given everything for her family, but she had forgotten one crucial thing along the way: herself. The past few months had been a wake-up call, showing her just how far she had strayed from the woman she had once been. She had lost her sense of identity in her desire to keep the family together, in her effort to maintain peace, to be the one who always sacrificed. Now, with everything behind her, Lila was determined to rediscover herself. She had already taken the first step by standing up for herself in the courtroom, by demanding justice and reclaiming what was rightfully hers. But that was just the beginning. The true work, the real transformation, was about to begin. The first thing Lila did was reconnect with her passions. She had always loved painting, but it had been years since she'd picked up a brush. Life had always seemed to get in the way: work, family, responsibilities. But now, there was nothing holding her back. She bought new paintbrushes, a fresh canvas, and set up a small studio in the corner of her home. The smell of the paint was intoxicating, and with each stroke, Lila felt herself returning to a version of herself that she had long forgotten. The creativity poured out of her like a flood, and for the first time in a long time, Lila felt alive. Each painting she created brought a sense of fulfillment and joy that had been missing for years. It wasn't just about making beautiful art, it was about rediscovering who she was outside of her role as a mother and a wife. For so long, she had been defined by her relationships with others, but now she was defining herself on her own terms. Lila also decided to take some time for herself, something she hadn't done in years. She booked a weekend getaway to a small cottage by the lake, a place she had always wanted to visit but never had the time for. The trip was exactly what she needed. She spent her days walking by the water, meditating, and reflecting on everything that had happened. It was as though the peaceful surroundings were healing the wounds she hadn't even realized were there. But the most significant change in Lila's life came through her relationship with Jake. The distance that had grown between them during the chaos of the past months began to shrink. After the trial, things had been strained. Jake had been torn between his loyalty to his wife and his love for his mother, and it had taken a toll on their relationship. But now that everything had settled, Jake was able to truly see what had happened, and he could finally understand the pain Lila had gone through. One evening, as Lila was painting in her new studio, she heard a knock on the door. When she opened it, she found Jake standing there, a small smile on his face. "Can I come in, Oz?" he asked. Lila stepped aside, motioning for him to enter. She had missed her son more than she realized, and seeing him standing there, ready to reconnect, filled her heart with warmth. "Mom?" Jake began, his voice sincere. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. I know I've let you down, and I'm sorry for that. You've always been there for me, and I didn't see how much you sacrificed until now. I was so blinded by everything going on with Marissa that I couldn't see what was really happening. But now, I see it. I see you." Lila's heart swelled with emotion. She had always loved Jake, but there had been times when she felt as though he was slipping away from her. Now, he was here, acknowledging the hurt he had caused and, more importantly, offering her the opportunity for a fresh start. "I know it's been hard, Mom," Jake continued, his voice trembling slightly. "But I want to help you find your way back. I want to help you reclaim your life. You don't have to do this alone." Lila smiled softly, feeling a tear slip down her cheek. "Thank you, Jake," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for seeing me, for understanding. I don't want to carry this burden anymore. I want to live, truly live, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can." Jake stepped forward and wrapped his arms around his mother, holding her tight. It had been a long time since they had shared a moment like this, and Lila savored it. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but now, for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. She had Jake by her side, and that meant everything. Over the next few weeks, Lila and Jake spent more time together. They talked, laughed, and slowly began to rebuild the bond they had once shared. It wasn't perfect, it never would be after everything they had been through, but it was real. And that was all that mattered. Lila also found herself embracing new opportunities. She took on freelance painting jobs, began to offer art classes at the local community center, and even started volunteering at a shelter for abused women. It was as though the world was opening up to her in ways it never had before. She had a new sense of purpose, a new sense of freedom, and most importantly, Lila had found herself again. The woman who had once been consumed by the needs of others was now living her own life, on her own terms. She wasn't just Jake's mother or someone's wife. She was Lila Foster, a woman of strength, creativity, and resilience. As the months went by, Lila's confidence grew. She had found peace with the past, and she was no longer defined by the mistakes of others. She was ready for whatever came next. She had a whole life ahead of her, and for the first time, she was excited about the future. Her phone buzzed one afternoon, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text from Jake. "Let's go to dinner tonight, just the two of us. I'm proud of you, Mom." Lila smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude wash over her. She was proud of herself, too. For the first time in a long time, Lila felt like she was truly living, and nothing could take that away from her. Lila stood at the edge of the lake, watching the soft waves ripple under the fading light of the setting sun. The air was cool, but the peace that surrounded her made it feel like everything in the world had finally come into place. Her fingers gripped the brush tightly, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, she felt truly alive. The past year had been a whirlwind of revelations, pain, and triumphs. She had fought through betrayal, faced the truth about her family, and finally found herself in the process. What had started as a nightmare of manipulation and deceit had transformed into the journey of a lifetime. Lila had reclaimed her life, and she was determined to never look back. For too long, she had believed that her worth was defined by what others needed from her. Her husband, her son, her daughter-in-law, they had all demanded so much from her, and she had given it willingly, even at the expense of her own happiness. She had sacrificed, loved, and cared deeply, thinking that was the only way to keep the family together. But she had never asked herself what she wanted. Now, that had changed. Lila had chosen to live for herself. She didn't need the validation of others anymore. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the pressure to be perfect. She could be herself, unapologetically, and that was enough. With her newfound sense of freedom, Lila decided to leave the past behind and start fresh. She moved into a smaller, cozy apartment in the heart of the city. It wasn't much, but it was hers. It felt like the first step toward truly embracing her independence. Every morning, she woke up with a sense of excitement about the day ahead. She no longer felt burdened by the weight of family expectations or the constant need to please others. She could finally breathe, and the air felt sweeter than she had ever imagined. Her art had become a significant part of her life again. She painted every chance she got, pouring her emotions onto the canvas. It wasn't about making money or impressing anyone anymore. It was about expressing herself, about capturing the joy, sadness, and hope she had experienced. Her art was her personal journey, and every stroke of the brush represented a step forward in her transformation. She felt more connected to herself than ever before. Lila also made time to travel. She had always wanted to see the world beyond the walls of her home, but life had always gotten in the way. Now, she was free to go wherever her heart desired. She traveled to places she had always dreamed of visiting. Small coastal towns, vibrant cities, serene countryside escapes. Each place she visited left its mark on her, and each journey helped her understand the depth of her own soul. One of her favorite trips was to an art retreat in the mountains. It was there that she met Grace, a fellow artist who shared her passion for painting and living authentically. They bonded over their shared experiences of reinvention, and their friendship grew stronger with each passing day. Grace reminded Lila of what it meant to truly live, without guilt, without the constant need for approval. It was during that retreat that Lila realized she didn't need anyone else's acceptance to feel fulfilled. She could make her own happiness. But even as she relished her newfound independence, Lila couldn't help but reflect on her journey with Jake. She had spent so many years fighting for their relationship, doing everything she could to maintain their bond. But now, she understood that some relationships, no matter how much love is given, are simply not meant to last. Jake had tried his best to be there for her, but he had been a product of his own choices, and those choices had led him down a path that didn't align with Lila's values. He had chosen Marissa, and that was something Lila couldn't change. Still, she held no animosity toward him. She loved him. He was her son, after all. But she also knew that he had to live his own life, just as she had to live hers. The space between them had grown, but that didn't mean it couldn't be filled with understanding, with mutual respect. Over time, Lila came to accept that sometimes letting go was the most loving thing you could do. Jake had to find his own path, and Lila had to find hers. They were two separate people now, each walking their own journey. And that was okay. She still saw Jake from time to time, and their interactions were much more peaceful. He had taken responsibility for his actions, and Lila had forgiven him. But their relationship had changed, and Lila had come to terms with that. They weren't the same people they had once been, and that was something Lila could accept. She no longer needed his approval to feel validated. One evening, as Lila was sitting on her balcony, sipping a glass of wine and watching the sunset, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Jake. "Mom, I've been thinking about everything. I'm proud of you. You've really done the hard work to make your life better. I want you to know I'll always love you. I hope we can find a new way to connect." Lila smiled, tears welling in her eyes. This was it, the closure she had longed for. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. They would find their way back to each other in their own time, in their own way. Lila knew that life was never going to be easy, but for the first time in a long time, she felt whole. She had taken back control of her life, reclaimed her happiness, and found a peace she had never known before. The journey wasn't over yet, but for the first time, Lila wasn't afraid of what the future might hold. She wasn't living for anyone else anymore. She was living for herself.